Hello, my beautiful friends and fellow seekers. I will be your host as we explore the first new moon of 2022, the Capricorn New Moon, happening on January 2nd. And this new moon is really cool. I love it. I actually love working with this energy so much, moving through Capricorn season. It's a really powerful, beautiful time that I think sometimes doesn't get the credit it deserves, unless, of course, you are one of those beautiful Capricorns out there, then you know, you're already in the know about this energy. What I will say about this new moon, though, is it combines two elements of just living this life that I think we often think of as disparate, separate, not connected, and it brings them together. But in fact, I think these two things go really naturally together and are really the stuff of how we make changes in our lives. So this new moon is really, really great. It is going to highlight earth energy. So this is going to be a very grounding moon where we are really feeling into our bodies, allowing things to process, as well as when you're working with a lot of earth energy, like we will be for this new moon. This is going to be about seed planting, intention setting, but in the larger vision, right? When we're working with earth energy, we're not planting seeds and then expecting them to sprout tomorrow. We're planting seeds that we know we are going to be cultivating over time and taking care of and tending, such as things like new habits. Though I don't want to get into like the resolution thing. We're not going there. I'm not interested in making January about harsh discipline. And I'm not interested in talking about Capricorns purely in terms of disciplinary stringency. That is not where we're going at all here today. So, but it is a time for like slow change that happens over time and with practice and evolution, right? So that's part of what's going to be going on here. So we have the sun and the moon coming together at 12 degrees of Capricorn. And like I said, Capricorn energy is often associated with fathering energy. It's associated with energies like Saturn and kind of stability, security, consistency, and motivation and willpower and determination to move through this world. Those are things that, when activated in a way that's very true for us, are extremely powerful and fun to play with, and an aspect of life that can be really, really beautiful. This is also, I think, really crucially when it comes to working with Capricorn energy, especially with a new moon like this, we really want to be thinking about our inner parenting style as well. How we motivate ourselves, how we treat ourselves when we have lower energy or we're needing comfort, how we treat ourselves when we are trying to figure out what a good routine, a good sense of stability is going to be for us, where we self-sabotage when it comes to those things. Capricorn asks all of those questions. This new moon is happening during a Venus retrograde in Capricorn, and a time when we're already thinking about what it means to self-parent and take care of ourselves and love on ourselves. So Capricorn New Moon in and of itself is going to be a lot about intention setting, figuring out where you want security, stability. I also think about this new moon in the context of the full moon in Gemini we just had a couple of weeks ago. And that full moon in Gemini was very eye-opening. It got a lot of energy moving. In a lot of ways, I feel like it unstuck a lot of energy. There was a lot of ideas floating around, a lot of new doorways kind of feeling like they're opening. Now with the Capricorn new moon, we can kind of take a moment to ground into that and figure out what that means for us in the practical day-to-day way we move through the world. But here's where it gets interesting, and why I was saying there's a couple different flavors working together here that I think we often think of as separate. Because we have that new moon in Capricorn, pretty straightforward, pretty to the point, very beautiful, super supportive of us, taking care of ourselves, nurturing ourselves, developing the self-parenting we want to have this year. The way that we treat ourselves internally is so important, and having a healthy inner parent figure inside of ourselves, part of ourselves that we can activate regularly and rely upon regularly, is a huge asset in life. But this new moon is also trining Uranus in Taurus at 10 degrees of Taurus. Uranus in Taurus is such an interesting one because Uranus itself is all about revolution, doing things outside the box, toppling the apple cart, exploring what the world looks like beyond the normal and the conformity. But Uranus in Taurus is also going to be about how we do that in our day-to-day, how we create stable, functioning life, right? And with this trine, what's happening here is that when we're looking at our habits and the way we self-parent and the way that we set intentions, with the way that we talk about ourselves, the way that we think about what we're capable of doing or what we don't feel like doing, and even just understanding for each of us what motivation means, it often means that we need to actually step out of what has been considered familiar when it comes to our routines and our habits. And that's where Uranus comes in, because Uranus says we need to have new routines and habits that are unfamiliar, that might be a little bit uncomfortable or strange, or you may be trying to figure out what that is. So rather than stability being seen as kind of stagnancy or sticking with the familiar or sticking with the things the way that they have always been done, this new moon is asking us to, yes, find stability, but find stability outside of just the familiar, and assuming that the familiar is what is keeping us afloat at this time. And so in many ways, this new moon is a time to kind of assess if we are going to work with this new calendar year, which I think psychologically, it does make a difference when you look at that new calendar date, right? There is kind of a sense that, okay, in our culture, we separate out time in these ways, and it does sit with us. So if we're sitting here, the solstice has just happened, we're in the midst of a Venus rebirth during this new moon, we're exploring what it means to be in this new year. This is a really great time to notice if you have any routines, habits, ways that you have been self-parenting, either all throughout your life or even just in the last year. This is a great time to assess if those familiar routines are still something that you want to take with you moving forward. And I think this is actually really fun to set new inner parenting intentions that really reflect where we are now and not where we have been in the past, not just what's expected of us, not just sticking with the familiar by rote kind of way that we problem solve and inner parent and show up in the world. And in this way, it can really open a lot of doors. And here's the thing, when we are willing to step outside of those familiar patterns, right? The patterns that they're really familiar, so they inherently feel very safe. And this isn't to say that every familiar pattern we have is bad for us. There are plenty of familiar patterns that we have, each of us has, it's probably works great. But there's always going to be those familiar patterns that either we have picked up from generations before us or that we have kind of developed to cope with stress or overwhelm that may or may not be what we really need. And I think sometimes it's a little scary to embrace that the seeds we're planting, the intentions we're setting for ourselves, the way that we're thinking about ourselves, perceiving ourselves is going to be outside of the familiar by rote way that we talk about and perceive ourselves moving forward. But this is also really empowering because it's those little practices, it's those places of consistency where we start to make change in our lives. It's not just about a lightning strike moment and everything changing all the time. That's one way change happens, but the way that a lot of change happens in this world, in this physical world, is that we practice. And even in the energetic world, we practice, we sit with, we slowly nudge towards things. And this new moon is just asking us to put our toe just outside where we would normally put our toe, in an area that maybe we've been holding back a little bit. Maybe we've been feeling a little bit like we're not allowed to pursue that or explore that or dream about that or start to practice into that, if you're wanting to sign up for that dance class or that painting class, or you're wanting to learn a new skill this year, or you're wanting to expand what you do and the work that you do, and you feel like you're not quite allowed to take that step out into the unfamiliar, this new moon is one of those moons that's really great for reconsidering why it is that you feel you're not allowed to begin that project. It's going to ask questions about things like it's too late, I'm too old, I am not worth the space or the effort. Why even try? I'm doing the same thing that I've been doing for the last couple of years. It's working. I shouldn't have any complaints about it. So why do I feel so empty inside? These are the questions that come up with this. But it's also a very hopeful, playful new moon. I want to just point out too that this new moon is happening just a handful of days after Jupiter has moved into Pisces. So we're working on a completely new Jupiter transit. Mercury will have just entered Aquarius during this new moon as well. well. So we're working kind of on this point of change, this point of shift over. And in that, we're kind of peering into what we want our typical day, our sense of consistency, our sense of motivation to look and feel like, which, I mean, sometimes that can kind of sound a little ho-hum, because it's like, daily routine, is that really that interesting? But I tell you what, this is where some serious magic happens. So have fun with it. The card that wanted to come out is the Six of Swords. And that's so interesting because, like I was saying, this new moon is going to ask us, are those familiar confines, those familiar shapes, those familiar conversations, those familiar words we use to describe ourselves, those familiar ways that we do our routines, really connecting with us anymore? What shores do we need to leave behind? We are going to be leaving behind a lot of the ways that we've been dealing with stress and control and how we create and move through the world that seemed really important over the last couple of years. And that's not to denigrate our past selves, to say that we really failed and we've been too obsessed with one thing or another. The way that this works is that, we create skill sets and tool sets to do what we need to do in any given moment. And then we evolve and we move on. And so it's important that we just keep checking in, because something that's completely valid and works very well for us a couple of years ago and that no longer is feeling quite right for us, it doesn't mean that it was a mistake or it was something bad. It just means that it's time to leave it behind. And so this new moon, while it is a new moon, it is about setting intentions. It's about imagining what that next shoreline is going to look like. It's also about getting very real with where you are consistently plugging yourself back into a familiar pattern that hurts or that just doesn't feel right. Because here's the other thing. Sometimes in our growth, our shape changes. It just changes. I'm going through this in a huge way right now, where I have grown and changed. It's like kind of critical mass point. And there are times when I just want to go back to my really, really familiar life where I knew where I was living and I just kind of knew the contours of it all, but I just can't. Like, I have to move forward on this next path. It's super exciting. It's a little scary because I don't know how it's all going to work out. I don't know all the steps right yet ahead, but I do know that my shape does not fit into the old container anymore. And this new moon is really asking us to get comfortable and just really feel into and admit that our shape has changed and that is okay. Not only is that okay, but this can springboard us into some really great new intentions, ideas, ways of moving through the world, and even unlock parts of ourselves that we feel like we weren't allowed to access before, that we weren't allowed to begin before. This new moon is going to say, just begin. Just begin. If it's something that you want to do, just begin. Start putting in that 5 minutes a day and whatever it is, painting, dancing, meditating, breathing, going on a walk. That's all we need to start with. So this new moon is going to bring us back to basics, as well as tell us that the basics are how we get outside of those energy blockages and those stuck places and those places where we feel like we have to just stick with the familiar, even though it hurts because we no longer fit within it. So it's a powerful new moon. It's also one that I think isn't going to be particularly overwhelming. There's a gentleness to this trine, even though it is about exploring outside of our comfort zone. It's also about grounding. It's also about self-parenting. It's also about nourishing. It's also about calming our nervous system, because Capricorn energy is really great for calming the nervous system. This is very grounded energy that isn't about just getting zaps and zings all the time. So it's really, really great for just physically, emotionally letting yourself process through and creating the safe space within yourself to really witness how you have changed and grown without judgment, without needing to rush around and do everything different right this second, but just to start to entertain the notion of how we've grown and changed. Really powerful stuff. So I'm going to be doing my big old activation over on Patreon, where we check in with this new moon closer to the day that it happens and really feel through it. And I'm going to be doing a big activation there for that inner parenting and the new contracts we want to make with ourselves when it comes to our inner parent and our inner child and how we want to take that moving forward. So I'd love to see you over on Patreon if you're looking for some more support. We're also piece by piece going through this Venus retrograde and getting used to Jupiter in Pisces. So I would love to see you over there. You can also find me on my website and my email as well as Instagram. And yes, there are imposters out there. I keep saying this like over and over again, but I just want people to know there's just the one real me. So I'll leave my handle below so you know exactly where to find me. And I'd love it if you stuck around here. I'd love to see you here time and time again. I will see you again so soon. We're going to have that full moon in Cancer coming right up, and have a gorgeous beginning to January, my friends.